Some people are saying that this is an easy win for Oregon, that the Ducks are going to blow out Penn State. There's a reason that Vegas only has this as a field goal type of game.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of the show. And help me welcome back a very esteemed guest, a great friend of mine, Matt Freiler. A lot of you know him better as Matty Fresh, the artiste behind hit songs like Trace McSorley, Jahan Dotson. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And stick around for the final segment because we are breaking some news on this podcast, an exclusive news break here on Locked On Nittany Lions. But Matt, I want to start with this. The general consensus seems that Penn State is going to be blown out by Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. James Franklin can't win the big game. Drew Aller is terrible against elite teams. So Oregon, therefore, is going to destroy Penn State. Not quite. I disagree.
Zach, great to be back. I'm riding high right now. Penn State 11-1 for the first time since 2008. It's a good feeling to have that 11 wins and now have an opportunity to play in the Big Ten championship. And yeah, a lot of outside noise. Of course, there has been all season. There's still people out there who think Penn State only has 0 or 1 wins over winning teams or bowl eligible teams. The facts just aren't out there, and we're here to bring them to you because
misinformation.
It seems like Penn State's being given this rap as a team who hasn't played anybody when their strength of schedule is actually pretty high. So yeah, we'll debunk some of those myths and tell you why. I think the bigger question is, will Penn State lose a nail biter or will they win outright? I don't think it's a question of will this game be a lopsided blowout.
It is not going to be lopsided one way or another. Oregon and Penn State are the 1 and 3 teams for a reason. This is not by accident because you bring up an excellent point. Oh, well, USC is down and West Virginia is not that good. Penn State still played 10 Power 4 conference teams. That accounts for something. Penn State is not responsible for it because everyone wants to point to the fact that Penn State, hasn't played all these elite teams. And to be frank, other than maybe Georgia, I can't really say that there's another maybe a Florida too, where a host of teams are playing all these top tier teams. Okay, selectively, right? Oregon played Ohio State, Penn State played Ohio State, and what have you. But Penn State's strength of schedule is still as high up as it is because they played 9 conference games in addition to West Virginia, and the committee values that. They could have easily scheduled another tune-up game, but more importantly here, Penn State found ways to win those games because in that same breath, we see in the SEC, our strength of schedule is tough. Insert whatever SEC team, Ole Miss, Alabama. Then why are you losing to the likes of a Kentucky? Why are you losing to the likes of and that's the thing, Penn State, the equivalent to those kinds of teams, whether it be West Virginia or USC or Minnesota, Penn State found ways to win. Can't say the same for some of those other teams that people claim to be better than Penn State and that they got here by luck.
Yeah, and here's the bottom line, Zach. Penn State hasn't lost to a team that they were supposed to beat in 3 years. 3 years. And I know fans will push back and say, what do you mean we weren't supposed to beat Ohio State this year? We weren't supposed to beat Michigan last year? Technically not.
No.
Odds makers had us as underdogs in those matchups. And I understand you have to win a game as an underdog sometimes, but talking about Penn State as a favorite and as a big favorite, it's been 3 years since they lost to a team that they were supposed to beat. The theme in all of college football this year has been teams losing games they're supposed to win. Double-digit, 20-point favorites. The dogs are barking this year, especially in the SEC. These are some live underdogs. I mean, we saw a valiant effort from underdog SC, from underdog Minnesota, even from underdog Wisconsin in the first half. And Oregon has seen the same thing. Yeah. Oregon was up 3 points on Idaho, FCS Idaho, with 6 minutes left in their opener. Does anybody care about that? No.
Apparently not.
Does anybody care about the fact that Boise State was 1 possession away from beating Oregon in the zoo? No, nobody talks about that. Does anybody talk about how Oregon needed a defensive stop to beat Wisconsin at the end of the game in a 1-possession dogfight? No. So, yes, I understand Oregon's 12-0. They deserve all the credit. But at the end of the day, they haven't been any more dominant than Penn State has, right? These are two teams that are very evenly matched. They've got us in a couple position groups. I think we still have the majority of talent and position group advantages. But we'll have to see because this is an evenly matched game. And anybody suggesting that, you're going to lay the 3.5 with Oregon and just be safe, don't hold your breath.
It's going to be a 1-score game. That I am not afraid to go on the record with and guarantee it. One way or the other. I look at this. It's who is going to be on the other side of that 1-score game with the Big Ten championship. I want to frame that idea though, because you say that Penn State maybe has the depth of talent. I say it's condensed. I think that Penn State has more superstars, or the talent is more condensed in Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren. Those guys are surefire, and then you can even add a Zane Durant in this case, where Penn State has the bona fide superstars, whereas Oregon, Dylan Gabriel and Jordan James and Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and a Terrence Ferguson. I'm not saying Penn State doesn't have other quality players, but I'm saying, okay, there's tier 1 of Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren who are going to go pretty early in the first round. And then I look around at Oregon and I see the depth of talent, I think, is greater there for the Ducks than Penn State.
Yeah, I think about really 2 things. I think about the matchup on paper, the X's and O's on the field, and the position groups that I think Oregon has an advantage over Penn State in. Obviously, they're wide receivers against our defensive backs, and this is really where you miss a guy like KJ Winston, right? To be out there to make a difference. I mean, you talk about Johnson and Stewart, and Johnson just coming back off an injury and having a huge game against Washington. Obviously, he was hurt for a bit there. But, yeah, they've got more speed than our defensive backs. I think that could be trouble. I think the other group, when you flip to the other side of the ball where Oregon has an advantage, they're defensive backs against our wide receivers. Obviously,
I think that's almost a given. Unfortunately, that's almost a given in every game. Unfortunately, it's Oregon's defensive backfield is good, but it's also because Penn State's wide receivers, now pass catchers, that makes the difference. Tyler Warren, but if we're talking strictly about wide receivers,
I would think Oregon's pass defense is better than their run defense. It's top 10. Their run defense is good as well. They have a solid front seven, but I look at that pass defense at number 8 in the country in pass defense, and then maybe one that I lean Oregon is their defensive line with Uungalele and Jordan Birch coming back off injury. Those 2 guys, almost 20 sacks combined coming off the edge against Penn State's offensive line that just lost Anthony Donko. And, you got Nolan Rucci kind of stepping in and trying to find his way as a starter. So those are the 3 matchups. But when you look at Penn State, I'll say it right now. We've got a better quarterback. We've got a better running back. Obviously, we have the best tight end in America. We've got them on the defensive line. We should be able to rush the passer. Everybody thinks Dylan Gabriel's this mobile guy. Sure, he's got 175 rushing yards on the year. You know what I mean? He's not Jalen Milroe. He's not Lenoris Sellers.
That's the same thing with Drew Aller. Drew Aller can run the football when he needs to. Dylan Gabriel can do the exact same thing.
They are trying to not run Dylan Gabriel. But, yeah, he can make plays with his feet if he has to, but he's not necessarily this dual threat, kill you with the run type of guy. So I think Penn State has better defensive linemen and linebackers than Oregon can block up front. But yeah, I am concerned about our wide receivers against the defensive backs, and I am a little concerned as well about their speed on the perimeter offensively against some of our corners and safeties.
You mentioned the battle in the trenches. That's why college football coaches say the battle is one up front. Football games in general are one up front on both sides. This game is going to be dictated by Penn State's defensive line and Oregon's defensive line. We'll talk about keys to the game, those matchups a little more in depth that Matty Fresh had mentioned on the other side of this break. And today's show is brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks, and that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier than before. Game Time Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on incredible seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And yes, let us look at tickets on Game Time for the Big Ten Championship between Penn State and Oregon. You can go to the Game Time app or gametime.co on your browser, and all the Game Time picks are listed right in front of me here. You can get a super deal. Field End Zone, Section 128, Row 20, all in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. $114 per ticket. If you're looking for the lowest price on tickets for the Big Ten Championship, Terrace Sideline, a little bit higher up in the stadium, but Section 634, Row 16, $22 a piece on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's episode is also brought to you by Team Ticker. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign for college sports fans. And if you're watching this episode, that right there to my left is a Team Ticker sign. Whether it's football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, soccer, or softball, Team Ticker has got you covered for not only Penn State, but other available schools over at teamticker.com. Never miss a game again, as the high-tech retro display provides a countdown to the next big game, as well as daily updates on the latest team news, stats, schedule, standings, and much more. Team Ticker is the ultimate addition to your Nittany Lions sports collection, and once you hang it on the wall, it is going to be the talk of all your fellow Penn State sports fans. If you're looking for that one eye-catching item to showcase your team pride or a gift for that special Nittany Lions fan, go to teamticker.com and pick up your Team Ticker today. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign, and right now they are running a $50 off holiday sale. All you got to do is go to teamticker.com and take advantage of the holiday sale now and get $50 off your Team Ticker purchase today. That is $50 off for their holiday sale over at teamticker.com. So you mentioned how Oregon's defensive line, you would give a slight lean against Penn State's offensive line. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing. I look at Oregon. So everybody wants to talk about Oregon, probably because of the conceptions of this team from the Pac-12, Chip Kelly days, that this is an offense that can fly up and down the field, and they can. Elite teams are elite. Great teams are great because they can find a bunch of ways to win. Oregon can win a shootout. Oregon can win a defensive struggle. But I honestly side with Oregon's defense overall being better than its offense. And it is because of those guys up front and the matchup against Penn State's offensive line. Why did Penn State lose that game to Ohio State? Part of it had to do with the fact that Ohio State's wide receivers could win one-on-one battles. From Penn State's perspective, Oregon is actually very similar to the Buckeyes in the fact that you have Tez Johnson, you have Evan Stewart, you have Trayshawn Holden, and you also have a tight end in Terrence Ferguson. That's kind of that extra component to Oregon's offense, whereas G. Scott is not comparable to Terrence Ferguson. But, and Dylan Gabriel's better than Will Howard. But when you compare them to Ohio State, Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, that was difficult for Penn State because in crunch time, when they needed a first down, when they need a chunk of yardage just to get them back within striking distance, it was those wide receivers that were winning one-on-one matchups because you can't double any of them. So if Penn State wants to double a Tez Johnson and try to take him away, then you leave Evan Stewart in one-on-one coverage. Then you leave Terrence Ferguson or Trayshawn Holden, and it's almost like a pick your poison type of thing. And Ohio State, in third and long or third and not so manageable, were able to convert because of those one-on-one battles that the wide receivers were winning more often than not, and also because the pressure that Drew Aller had to face against Ohio State's defensive line, or the fact that they got turned away twice inside of the 5 because Penn State couldn't get push along the line of scrimmage. Penn State's offensive line and Penn State's defensive backs are the ones that I circle and say, what are you going to do schematically to help them out?
Yeah, and really, I look at who can get to the quarterback. You're talking about 12 games. Drew Aller's only been sacked 11 times. I mean, that is phenomenal. That is credit to these pass blockers.
Drew deserves a lot of credit there too.
Oh, yeah, you see like the one in the Maryland game. I mean, it was a sure sack. And I think the broadcast likened him to Ben Roethlisberger in the
That's
pocket
fair.
when he kind of
Yep.
flipped it backwards to Warren, and then he did his thing for, a 30-yard gain. But, yeah, Drew's only been sacked 11 times, which, I mean, wow. I mean, you think some of these quarterbacks around the country taking 4, 5, 6 sacks a game, that's an incredible number. But Dylan Gabriel on the other side has only been sacked 12 times
Yep.
in 12 games. And it comes down to, who can get to the quarterback. I think another key for me, Zach, really actually two of them. The first one being looking deep into this matchup. James Franklin always talks about the third quarter, right? Great team in the third quarter. One of the best teams in the country in the third quarter. Kind of prides himself on that, coming out of the locker room with
As they should. Zero
Right.
0 points allowed in the third quarter all season long.
Well, I don't know if it's zero, but it's close. It's definitely the best in the country, and I'll do you one better. Oregon, very bad offensively in the third quarter. 118th in the nation in scoring in the third quarter. They only score 3 points a game in the third quarter. So is that a byproduct of they're usually up big at half, or is this just a team that maybe comes out a little slow out of the locker room and maybe doesn't have the kind of aggressiveness with adjustments that Penn State has? I look at that and I think Oregon is probably more of a first half team. So I would not be surprised. I think especially in the second quarter, their numbers are very good. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Oregon leading this game at half. But I'll tell you right now, if Penn State is down 6, if Penn State is down, I'll go as high as even 10. I wouldn't count the Nittany Lions out of this game because they have a big advantage in that third quarter. And I think the one key that really stands out to me, though, Oregon gave up 7.7 yards a carry to Ashton Genty. And sure, you could say Genty did that against everybody. Genty deserves the Heisman. Penn State doesn't have a running back that caliber. Sure, those are all good arguments. But then you look at the Ohio State game. Travion Henderson, who I don't think is any better than Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, 10 carries for 87 yards, 8.7 a carry for Henderson. So this is not a team that has been very successful against elite running backs. I would group Singleton and Allen in that category. And I think even if Penn State finds themselves down a score or two at half, I would run the ball. You cannot abandon the run here. Oregon is a better pass defense, like we've said, than a rush defense. And I think Penn State can run the ball against Oregon better than they ran it against Ohio State.
I do want to point out, more often than not, Penn State was holding opponents to 0 points in the third quarter. The only time they allowed more than 3 was to USC when they did allow 7 points to a touchdown. But everybody else was either 3 or under in the third quarter. So yes, Penn State is, and go figure again, right? In 2016, they were a second half team. 2024, they were a second half team. And what do those two teams have in common? They're both in the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, you got to know how to close games. And we didn't really talk too much about, it's all about matchups. I get that and on paper, but just the kind of other storylines around this game I think are important, and people might be overlooking some of these. The number one thing I look at is Oregon beat Washington in a game that not a lot of people watched. It was a blowout, 49-21. And you could say, oh, big deal. Oregon was a 17-point or more favorite, whatever it was, and they took care of business. No. Inside that building, that was a team that lost to twice last year, a team that ended their season, a team that knocked them out of the playoffs, a team that sent them to the Fiesta Bowl against Liberty while they went on and played in a national championship game. There is nobody that hated Washington this season more than the Oregon Ducks. That game mattered. But why does that matter for this game? They're riding high. And here comes the letdown spot for Oregon. That was an emotional game for a lot of their guys to avenge that loss. They come in, they win that game, they blow Washington out. They have one of their most spirited performances all year. Dan Lanning talks about the record-setting performance on defense. Magically, you have Tez Johnson and Jordan Birch all of a sudden healthy, right, to play against Washington.
Yeah.
I think that this is now a letdown spot for Oregon. I think you saw one of their best performances of the year. And this is kind of a weird spot because now they know, even with the loss, they're going to get a home game. Or if they win, they're going to the Rose Bowl. So I don't think you get a spirited performance out of Oregon. And I'll give you another reason why. How much does Oregon care about that trophy, about that Big Ten championship? This is a West Coast team, right? This isn't a team that understands the tradition of Big Ten football. This isn't a team that prides itself on Big Ten brand of football. This means more to Penn State. Our fans and Coach Franklin and his staff are the ones that have the memories of 2016 and how sentimental and how special that was. Our fans are the ones who smile when you're looking up in Beaver Stadium after the Maryland game and you see the Penn State's Big Ten championship bound. When Oregon already knew they were there for a couple weeks, it's just like, whatever, cool. It's a conference championship. I promise you this game means more to Penn State. And it's funny because I think you're headed for a scenario, unfortunately, where we know as diehards, right, and you know from covering the team, that if Penn State loses this game, it's never mattered less, right? Because you're going to have a great chance at a 5 seed, I guess a 6 seed at the lowest. You still get a home game and a pretty solid path. Now, if you win, it's interesting because you do get the rest, but then you have probably a better team to play in the Rose Bowl when you look at that 8-9 matchup and how that could shake out. But the reason, Zach, I think it's important for Penn State to win this game, even though it doesn't really affect their future and their plans, is because of the morale. I think you will get the narrative that you started off the show with from the media, from even our own fan base, about here goes big game James again, about Drew Aller can't win the big game. And it kind of, like, if you lose a game like this by 2 scores, you're going to hear that. And that kind of sucks the life out of, okay, 2 weeks from now, when we show up for the playoff game at home against Arizona State, if we lose this game, are the fans going to be booing James Franklin during intros because he lost another big game? We don't need that, right? So I would say one of 2 things. Either fans need to understand going into this game that this is not a traditional Big Ten championship where if you lose, you're going home.
It's not consequential.
They need to know that Penn State has never been in a better spot. Yeah. He could not ask for a better spot. You're either going to the Rose Bowl as the number 1 overall team in the country, or you're going to host a bad team. Not a bad team, but one of the worst teams in the playoffs.
One of the lower playoff teams.
Whoever gets the 12th seed, and you're going to be a heavy favorite. And then even looking down the road in the next round, you might get Boise State or the ACC champ. So Penn State is okay if they lose this game. The reason I'm all in for them to win is because of that morale. You need the momentum. You need the morale. You need this fan base to have a reason, right, to care about this playoffs. And just the fact of the matter is, you know, our fan base sometimes gets a little bit hard on James Franklin for losing it, and the media is certainly even worse. So that's what I would say is a reason where if you think this game doesn't matter, I'll give you a reason that it does for morale.
We'll share our final thoughts about just that. I think that's a good thing to finish up before the break, before the end of the show, but we got some news to break. A potential, when can you expect the next Matty Fresh track to be released? We'll tell you about it on the other side of this break. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can place just a $5 bet, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Let's look over at FanDuel.com for the lines for Penn State versus Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Penn State is a 3.5-point underdog to the Oregon Ducks. Oregon is -170 on the money line. Penn State is +140 on the money line. The total is actually moving down. It's 49.5 now. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So be prepared. A new Matty Fresh track is set to be released very soon to get everyone in the spirit of the postseason. Matt, what can you tell us about the latest track that is going to come out very soon?
Well, as many of you know, I've been a Penn State diehard since I was in diapers. I was born into it. And when I was in college, I had the opportunity to make a couple of songs and people liked them. So now we're going to keep going with it. It kind of became my brand and my thing. And what better year to do it, right? And obviously, Penn State 11-1 for the first time since 2008. It's been a special year, and I think this team does deserve a soundtrack. It's coming out Friday at midnight on Spotify and Apple Music or wherever you get your music. Gonna try to tease it a little bit early on Thursday evening, maybe later in the night on YouTube, depending how things go. But yeah, we're gonna have a soundtrack for this team. It's been a special year, and I think throughout the year, I've tried to remain in the moment and realize that maybe over the last 3 seasons, Penn State fans got kind of spoiled with blowing out Maryland and Purdue and blowing out, everybody else in the Big Ten. But I try to, think about those games as like specific memories and kind of challenges that we needed to get to 11-1. And, I get it. Everybody wants to look at the big picture, right? That, this 12-team playoff has benefited Penn State, but 11-1, Zach, is something that this program has not been able to do in 16 years.
They go 10-2 every year. I was reliably told that's what to expect.
That's a big deal, right? Because they've been to some special games in some special places. And yeah, you just got the feeling early on. I think probably after the USC game is where
it was the USC game.
Yeah, to where this team was going to take us places. And I think fans are going to enjoy a little bit of a soundtrack. And I think that's all the detail I'm going to go into. I'll keep it a surprise on what we're singing about.
I'll certainly be one of the first listeners for that track when it drops on Friday. Let's get some final thoughts about the Big Ten Championship. Oregon is a 3.5-point favorite per FanDuel, whatever, all the sports books, I think, at this point. It's going to be a close game. It's going to be a one-score game. It's going to be a one-score game, so therefore a single-digit game. I'm kind of back and forth as far as, because both teams have the opportunity to win. It would not surprise me one way or another. I look at this as a 50-50 game. I do think that Oregon, like I said, the talent is more spread out, and there's just mismatches that Penn State's got to find a way to overcome. So if Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen can call the games of their lives again, and that was my key against Ohio State, and frankly, I thought they did as close to a perfect job as they could have under the circumstances. Oh, well, you can't say that. Andy Kotelnicki's play calling was rough. Ohio State's a top 5 defense. You're going to have some rough play calls, and it's not going to look the prettiest, but Penn State was never out of that game. Penn State was always in it, and frankly should have won, but they got turned away at the goal line twice. That's how close they were. So there's a lot of what ifs and hypotheticals. Penn State should have won that game against Ohio State. And then what are we talking about if that's the case? So if Penn State was that close to Ohio State, they're going to be just as close to Oregon as well. However, as we've seen, the margin of error is not that far. Oregon won by 1 point. And I will even say once again, what if Ohio State should have won that game on the road out at Oregon? Play calling down the stretch, whatever, they ended up losing, but that was a 1-point win for Oregon. These 3 teams, it could have gone any way, and Penn State very well can win this game. Anybody that says this is a blowout is just looking at this 23 team, but this is not the same team. This is a completely different team here in 2024.
Yeah, thankfully we have a quarterback who doesn't like to ash cigarettes on the sideline and talk about how nobody wanted him and then slides down with 0 seconds left in a game. You don't have to worry about that. If you're Penn State, you got Drew Aller, not Will Howard. So you're right, that's a game situation where you can count on Drew to make the right decision when Will Howard didn't. And of course, Dan Lanning already put the 12-man trick on film where he had another corner in there defending the pass, and he ended up taking the yardage on the penalty and said, hey, we'll eat the 5 seconds or whatever it was off the clock. We'll take the penalty. That's not gonna fool Penn State this time around. But
nope.
I think I would say this: if you're a college football fan and maybe you're not necessarily a Penn State fan, but you're a fan of a different team or whatever, your team's going to a bowl game, your team doesn't have a chance to make the playoff, and you're just going to watch games casually on Conference Championship Saturday, and you're looking for a reason to get up for this Penn State Oregon Big Ten championship game, because certainly our fan base doesn't really need me to sit here and sell it. But, if you're a college football fan, I would say, look at it this way. We talk about conference realignment all the time in, the offseason, and then it kind of died. The conversation about that kind of died down as games were happening, and I get that. Let's go back and talk about it, right? This is Oregon coming in from the Pacific Northwest. This is a team that thinks they can compete in the Big Ten. This is a team that thinks they were going to run away with the conference from day one. This is a team that doesn't know Big Ten tradition. They don't know our weather. They don't know our hard-nosed brand of football. They don't know 3 yards in a cloud of dust, right? This is a flashy program. It's kind of like USC, right? They got Phil Knight. They got Nike against Penn State. The basic blues, the black shoes, the throwback, knock you in the mouth, tough kid, Pennsylvania, coal cracker type of team. So this becomes a very interesting matchup when you look at it that way. And I think that's the selling point, right? Is Oregon going to come in to the Big Ten in year one and smack this conference around? Penn State has got to be the team that takes
the last line of defense
and says, no way, this is the Big Ten conference. And when you signed up to play 13 games in this conference, you're not going to win them all, right? And this is our chance, right? So I think that's how you get the guys fired up. And really, from a matchup perspective, Dylan Gabriel's a baller. He's tops in the nation in completion percentage. Yeah. We got a pretty good quarterback too, though.
So is Drew.
He happens to be third overall in the country. So yeah, I'm going Penn State 27, Oregon 23. I think it's a great game. 2 great coaches, talent-loaded teams, and I just think it comes down to this: Oregon is going to have a letdown spot after that dramatic type of buildup that they had to Washington and how good they played against Washington.
Yeah, the revenge game. Tough. It's behind you.
That will be tough to do twice. Meanwhile, Penn State, they had Maryland.
They still have a lot to prove. So, Penn State, from the brand bias, the brand awareness, because as we pointed out earlier, everybody likes to say, oh, Penn State struggled with a MAC team. Bowling Green, they nearly lost. That was the same game where KJ Winston, arguably the next best player right there, 1A, 1B with Abdul Carter. That is one of the faces of your defense, and he's out for the season. He's out for the season at that point in time. Penn State knows it's a serious injury. The spectators do not in the moment, and they have to, on the fly, figure out what they're going to do against, frankly, a very good MAC team. That's a team that was competing for a conference championship in Bowling Green. But, Oregon struggled with Idaho.
Nobody cares.
FCS Idaho. So Penn State struggling against Bowling Green is a problem, but not Idaho. And Oregon struggling against Idaho.
Right. That's what it comes down to. And every team, you can look up and down the board, every team has either lost as a favorite, which Penn State has not, or they've played with their food and screwed around against bad teams. It's happening to everybody in college football. So, yeah, get ready for an interesting Big Ten championship. Now, fans, again, I will remind you, if Penn State loses a close game, you're going to be heartbroken. You're going to wish you got to see him hoist that trophy again. It's okay. We'll see.
And the national media is going to have a field day with it.
Who cares?
It's okay.
We'll see you in Beaver Stadium in a couple weeks after that, and we'll have a good path. Arguably, and I can't believe I'm saying this, if you look at the matchup world, possibly even a better path matchup-wise if you lose the Big Ten championship than if you win. Because I'm seeing a lot of Ohio State and Tennessee in that 8-9 matchup. And if Penn State wins this game, they got to be ready for a real good team in the Rose Bowl.
At a neutral site.
If you lose, it doesn't look like it's shaping up to where you're going to have to play an elite team. So keep that in mind. I'm on the fence about it. Obviously, I want the team to win, even though it will break my heart that I don't get to go back to Beaver Stadium. But in its place, we'll have a song on Friday, soundtrack coming out. Let's do it. I think you guys are really going to like this one.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. And yes, we get an exclusive news break here from Matty Fresh himself. New song coming out Friday and a soundtrack for this Penn State team, but also a potential postseason run. I also think it's important to point out that this is a barometer. This is a measuring stick to see what kind of postseason run Penn State can have by playing this Oregon Ducks team. Win or lose, you get a better understanding of just how good this Penn State, how great even this Penn State team is. He is Matty Fresh. You can check out all of his work, link down in the description. Leave a like on this episode, share it with friends and family. Let us know your thoughts and predictions down in the comments section. Matt, thanks so much for the time as always, and you always have an open invitation anytime you want to join the show.
Zach, thanks for having me. Keep it locked on, and you'll get exclusive announcements, more of them coming in the future. I love it.
And again, thank you so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions and making us your first listen and watch every single day. Now, for your second listen and watch, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast with host Craig Sheeman. He puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it, and it seems to be that way with all of this discourse around the 12-team playoff. You can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.